What's up everyone, hope you've had a good week. Today I'll be working on something a bit different, not really a subject matter that I normally do, but has a lot of roots in my past. Now I'll say right up front that I've been getting back into game development in my free time, which admittedly is only a couple hours a week here and there when I can spare it. Definitely just a fun hobby to kind of dabble around in. And right up to me making this art that you're seeing, I've just been using what's normally called developer art, which is just a bunch of circles, squares, triangles, just placeholder stuff. And I thought, I want to have cool looking stuff to look at. So all the stuff that I'm making is definitely still just a placeholder for just prototyping games, nothing really big right now. I'm kind of just learning things again. I still want to put a little bit of effort in because I want it to look cool all the way through. Totally unnecessary if you're making your own game, but I'm an artist and I want to have some cool stuff to look at while I work. It'll give me that little extra motivation to progress the game even further. So really quick, I've already finished one little spaceship dude. I'm working on another one right here. And it has been a really long time since I've done any sort of pixel art. I did it a lot when I first started out. It was kind of how I got my bearings, and I'll get more on that in a minute here. But basically, I don't remember much of the very specific fundamentals to pixel art and game art. I of course know that it's got to be very readable, high contrast helps, strong silhouettes help, because you want the player to be able to discern everything and very quickly at a glance know like who the player is, who the enemies are, stuff like that. Those types of fundamentals basically don't change across art in general. It's kind of self-explanatory, but all is to say, I'm not necessarily a pixel art expert. I never really was. I'm just kind of working off of what I know and what I remember. I'm also working in my trusty app of choice, Photoshop here, which is definitely overkill for just doing pixel art. Of course, I can get it done no problem because Photoshop can basically do anything if you approach it properly. But for pixel art, there's tons of better alternatives to making pixel art, mostly for their ease. A lot of them are free, a lot of them are super cheap. This is just what I know and it's just what I have, so it's what I'm doing. I have my canvas set so I could see every pixel. These are, I believe, 32 by 32, and I'll be working up to 64 by 64 and probably 128 by 128 pixels. And the brush that I'm using is literally just a solid single pixel brush. So overall, it's not really that different than working on anything else. I'm just super zoomed in, painting one pixel at a time, using only solid colors, and basically just trying to make big statements with little real estate. You saw me do a couple of basic frames of animation for the ship's thrusters there, only like 2 or 3 frames, I'm not going crazy here. And then I also kind of started brainstorming a little bit of a kind of stage selection map with the planets and the little ship and the stars and stuff. Very placeholder, very early. That's something I'm definitely not going to bother rendering or putting any more work into until the game itself is further along. And if it wasn't already obvious by now, we're clearly in space, so I'm going to need like some asteroids, some rocks and stuff like that to fill the screen. Some things that the player can blow up or crash into. And also just to have some graphical doodads to litter the map with to help define the size and the scale of everything. They'll also help give the player a sense of speed through parallax. I had a ton of fun doing these, and I say that a lot, and that's because I enjoy making art. But something about making these, I don't know, hit different. Probably because I started off making pixel art, and I remember it being a lot more difficult to do anything. I'd spend hours on just little icons for like equipment or status effects. So even though all that was well over 10 years ago, and what I'm working on here isn't necessarily award-winning, it still feels really good to see just how far I've come to kind of whip all these up in a matter of a couple of hours. And as an artist that's constantly suffering from imposter syndrome, I'll take any win I can get. In fact, I think we all would. It's actually funny looking back and seeing my trajectory as how I started as an artist in the first place. Out of high school, I wanted to get into software development and probably focus on making like video games. So I started to teach myself how to code and program, And at this time, software like Unity and Game Maker, RPG Maker, stuff like that was starting to become more robust because the smartphone market had just exploded and the app stores weren't quite the powerhouse they are today, but people were starting to flock to them and making some really good money off of games. HTML5 was also on the horizon, so that was going to revolutionize web-based games. And admittedly, I had next to no natural inclination when it came to understanding how to code and program. I worked very hard for a few years just understanding how to write code and program in a few different languages, and it was becoming pretty apparent that it wasn't necessarily going to be my passion. I really want to make games, but maybe this isn't it. That's when I started to explore some of the easier game development kits like RPG Maker and Game Maker. RPG Maker I had dabbled with probably back in high school before I had any idea of what I was doing when it came to programming. Now that I had a better understanding of everything, I was able to do much more, like writing my own custom content using scripts written in Ruby. I became very active in the forums, and overall just enjoyed the community, and was really renewed in my motivation to focus on game development. So looking at the other engines available, I noticed that Game Maker used its own object-oriented language called Game Maker language. One of its best features is the ability to export directly to consoles and the mobile app markets. So I picked it up and I began learning that. Over several months, a lot of trial and error, a lot of prototyping, I was finally ready to make my own full-fledged video game. Now, if you've ever been a solo developer on anything, you know what a monumental task this is. I definitely knew what I was getting into, but I thought that at this point I had finally found what I loved in making games specifically, so while it wouldn't necessarily come easy, I would have the motivation to see it through to the end. Well, after several months of building the game from the ground up within Game Maker, the project was getting huge, feature creep was real, and my motivation was starting to dry up. Not just from the workload, but also I was starting to realize just how much money it was going to cost to get good sound and good art. Up to this point, everything had just been placeholder, and my game was starting to make some pretty good progress, and I wanted it to start developing into something. Well, I sure as hell didn't have the budget for an artist, so after some research, I picked up the cheapest little art tablet that I could find. It was a monoprice. I remember the stylus took a AA battery, so it was kind of really awkward to use. Its drawing surface was super tiny. It, looking back, was really awful, but I didn't know any better. I had never even touched digital art before in my life. I picked up some free software and I just looked up any tutorials that I could. And while there certainly was a decent amount, it was nothing like it is today. These days you can get a tutorial for anything, any specific thing. Back then, maybe not so much. I was also never really that artistically inclined. I mean, I drew and colored about as much as your average kid or teenager does, one who's not in love with it anyways. And I always enjoyed it, but it never really dawned on me that it could be anything more than a way to kill some time here and there. So I'm sitting there, I'm making really bad pixel art. I'm starting to carry around a sketchbook with me whenever I go to my friends or whenever I'm out. I'm starting to draw stuff that has nothing to do with the game. Just overall, I'm kind of always drawing. And then it all just kind of dawns on me. I fucking love this. It was a strange revelation in the sense that how could it not have been more obvious? Like, I've always loved games. Games are nothing but art. And art itself, creating it is so readily available. Just a pencil and paper, right? Like, how did it take me so long to arrive to this revelation that, wow, this is how I can do everything that I want to do. This is how I can tell stories. This is how I can brainstorm my ideas and put them out into the world, en masse even, way faster than making a game, that's for sure. And since I had been making the game and seeing the market for artists, it all kind of dawned on me that, oh yeah, like, wow, this is a career. Which sounds stupid, because when you look around, there's art everywhere you look. Art is a part of everything. It's a part of every design. There is nothing around you right now that didn't start as a sketch on a napkin, essentially. So, yeah, I don't know, it was such a strange revelation to have that, like, oh yeah, wow, this is possible, and I love this. So, needless to say, I pretty much overnight made a hard switch into pursuing art. At least on the side in the beginning. I was still working jobs, but I drew and painted pretty much as often as I could. I did a lot of pixel art for RPG Maker people in the forums. I made some pretty decent money doing that for a while. I used to do it in Game Maker as well, early Unity, You know, back then all these forums were still popping off and there wasn't as many people fighting for these jobs. So I got some decent money in the beginning as a complete amateur who sucked, but it was all free education for me and I was doing it pretty dirt cheap, I'm not gonna lie. But you know, it added up, I got a lot of experience and I loved every minute of it. Haven't looked back. Whenever I think back to all this, you know, well over a decade ago, it's always a little fascinating to me because I see how I just treated every single thing that I liked as kind of a stepping stone to the next thing that I liked even more, until I arrived at what I love. And I think that there's an important lesson there somewhere about just trying things that you have any sort of interest in. There's no harm in it. It might open new doors, it might close some others, but you're growing every day, every time you try something. And just maybe it'll take you to a place that you never would have thought that you'd arrive at. But now that you're there, you're never gonna leave. Okay, I know that turned into quite the story, but I just had to tell it while I was working on pixel art because it's so nostalgic to me. Like, there was no better time for me to give my artist origin story than in this video here, which is actually coming to an end pretty soon here. You've seen me make a bunch of doodads like the rocks and the asteroids, a broken kind of satellite dish, some special effects like explosions that I did on a sprite sheet that will be animated in the game itself. I just did a shield breaking and recharging animation for the ships. I'm currently making a very quick placeholder HUD for the player. And it's important for me to stress that all of this is very super early. I don't know when I'm going to be done, if I'll ever be done. This is really just a fun thing to do in my free time, kind of go back to my roots. Maybe I'll have an update for you soon when the game gets further along. Maybe I never will again. But I still felt like this was something that I wanted to share. So with all that being said, let's take a look at what I've built so far. That way you can kind of see some of these graphics in play. It's essentially just an asteroids clone right now. I'm using it as a jumping off point to refamiliarize myself with GameMaker and its language. I've pretty much just built it up my way, just using the documentation and from what I can remember over a decade ago. But yeah, let's take a look at it, and then I'll kind of talk about where I'm going in the future with it. So here it is running in a web browser with my very expensive title screen here, very professional, very detailed. And yeah, right now it's just your basic asteroids clone. I just kind of put every asset on the screen right here so you could see what they all look like in motion. This build of the game really is just basic asteroids. I have another one that I've been working on where you can select your player ship. There's enemies flying around and a bunch of other cool things that I'm not ready to show off yet. But yeah, I mean, you move around, you shoot asteroids, they blow up, you get points for blowing them up. Gameplay loop dopamine hits at its finest. In this build's current state, it's clearly nothing too special, but this is a great jumping off point, and it's been a great way to kind of shake the rust off. And for this first game that I'm making, it's obviously not going to be anything too big. I'm actually using this kind of asteroid space format to teach myself some systems that I want to implement in a bigger game, if I ever get to that. Like right now I have a character select screen, there's different ships that have different stats that will level up. There's going to be loot that you can collect, which I have the loot system roughly in place right now. I still have to make the inventory system. There's going to be enemy types flying around and fighting you. I feel like the asteroids gameplay is still going to be the core heart of this particular little fun prototype that I'm making. So basically just imagine dogfighting but with asteroids controls. You're going to have different maps that you can travel to and collect loot and level up in. All pretty basic, but every one of these systems is going to really help me understand things, and then I could probably use parts of that code in the next game that I make. So I'm kind of really just thinking about what I want to make and then making a smaller version of it here. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways I can go with this. I do know that it's been very, very fun returning to this idea of making games, and this time in a hobby capacity, just in my free time. If it ever goes somewhere, that's cool. If it doesn't, that's cool too. It's just fun. But you know what? That wraps this one up. There's really not much more to say here. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. I'll see you guys next time.